Welcome to today's show. My name is John. As always, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, formerly known as iTunes, or follow the links to social media in the podcast show notes. So please subscribe when you're finished listening. You can also go to classicmovierev.com to read notes, bios, and other random movie thoughts. Today's movie is Red River, 1948. This movie is considered one of the classic westerns, but it has a strange ending. This Howard Hawks directed film was nominated for 2 Oscars, but didn't win in either category. The film is rated 7.8 on IMDb.com and scored 100% on the Tomato Meter and has an impressive 87% audience score on RottenTomatoes.com. The great film critic Roger Ebert named the essence of the film with his quote, "Red River is, quote, one of the greatest of all westerns when it stays with its central story about an older man and a younger one, and the first cattle drive down the Chisholm Trail." I think it would be up the Chisholm Trail. "It is only in the few scenes involving women that it goes wrong." Unquote. Ebert points out a few more things, like that the film is rooted in the classic tragedy as the son needs to kill his father to achieve manhood, and the man strives to live through his son. Ebert also said that film critic Tim Dirks said the movie parallels the Mutiny on the Bounty storyline. Another Ebert quote that is appropriate is, quote, "Two men act out a fierce psychological rivalry for 2 hours, only to cave in instantly to a female's glib tongue lashing," unquote. What is good about this movie is the joy the men show at the beginning of the drive, which clearly influenced City Slickers 1991, the flow of the cattle across the landscape, and the ease with which men did their job. They worked hard and endured with their reward somewhere over the horizon. Actors.
Right, and I'm a Shakespearean actor.
We have a lot of returning actors, beginning with John Wayne as Thomas Dunson. Wayne was covered in Episode 2, Chisholm, 1970. Montogomery Clift played Matt Garth, the adopted son of Tom Dunson. Clift was first covered in From Here to Eternity, 1953. Walter Brennan was in the role of Nadine Groot, Thomas Dunson's sidekick. Brennan was covered in Episode 67, The Buccaneer, 1938. Cowhands include Harry Carey Jr. as Dan Latimer. Carey Jr. was first covered in Episode 12, Billy the Kid vs. Dracula, 1966. Paul Fix played Taylor Yacy. Fix was first covered in Episode 15, The Undefeated, 1969. Real cowboy Hank Warden played Sims Reeves. Warden was covered in Episode 49, The Alamo, 1960. Sometimes Frankenstein, and sometimes Miss Kitty's bartender, Glenn Strange was uncredited as Naylor. Strange was first covered in House of Frankenstein, 1944. Harry Carey Sr. was cast as Mr. Melville, the happy cattle buyer. Carey Sr. was covered in Episode 74, Angel and the Bad Man, 1947. Shelley Winters had a tiny uncredited part as a dance hall girl in the wagon train they saved while on the cattle drive. Winters was covered in Episode 116, Wild in the Streets, 1968. Joanna Drew played Tess Millay. Drew was born in West Virginia in 1922. She moved to New York in 1940. The coal mine, moonshine, or move it on down the line if you're born in West Virginia. She worked as a model and made it to Broadway for a short-run play. Drew traveled to Hollywood with her actor husband. She was spotted by a talent scout, and her first film was Abby's Irish Rose, 1946. It didn't work out too well. 2 years later, she was in the Howard Hawks directed Red River, 1948, where she met her next husband, John Ireland. Drew continued with the John Wayne Posse and was in She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, 1949. She played opposite John Ireland in the great film noir All the King's Men, 1949. Drew was in her second John Ford film, Wagon Master, 1950. This movie helped create the television series Wagon Train, 1957-65. She was also great in film noir 7-Eleven Ocean's Drive, 1950, Pride of the Yankees, 1952, Thunder Bay, 1953, and Hell on Frisco Bay, 1955, but she was mostly cast in westerns. She began working in television heavily at this time. She was very active through the mid-1970s and surprisingly showed up in Superfuzz 1980. Drew died in 1996. John Ireland played gun handy Cherry Valance. Another tough guy American actor. Born in Canada, in 1914. The world just ain't fair. He was, however, raised in New York. IMDb.com says he worked at a water carnival. What is that? Like the Steel Pier and the Diving Horse and the guy doing the Triple Lindy? He started working in theater and eventually made it to Broadway. His first movie was the stellar World War II drama A Walk in the Sun, 1945. He continued in films with dramas and westerns such as Behind Green Lights, 1946, My Darling Clementine, 1946, Railroaded, 1947, Joan of Arc, 1948 with Ingrid Bergman, and of course the John Wayne Angerfest, Red River, 1948. He continued with Mr. Softtouch, 1949, I Shot Jesse James, 1949, and Roughshod, 1949. However, my favorite is as a conflicted reporter working for a corrupt and evil politician in All the King's Men, 1949. He was nominated for a Best Supporting Actor Oscar for this role. Ireland continued with dramas and westerns, turning in solid performances in films like Little Bighorn, 1951, The Bushwhackers, 1951, The 49th Man, 1953, The Good Die Young, 1954, The Fast and the Furious, 1955, Gunfight at the OK Corral, 1957, and 55 Days at Peking, 1963. He also began doing more television at this time. He had a major role in Spartacus 1960 with Kirk Douglas and continued to work until 1992. He also ran a small restaurant. Ireland died in 1992. There will be no Wilhelm screams in this episode. You can figure out who you think the bad guy is and put the scream in yourself. Story.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
In 1851, Thomas Dunson, John Wayne, and his friend Nadine Groot, Walter Brennan, left St. Louis and joined a wagon train heading west. 3 weeks later, they were near the border of Texas, and the land looked good to them. Much to the displeasure of the wagon master, Dunson and Groot say they are leaving the train. They are warned that there have been signs of Indians for the last few days. Dunson says he didn't sign on and he's leaving to take his bull and cows with him. Finn, Colleen Gray, makes a case to go with him, but he refuses. He gives her a silver bracelet that was his mother's. That night, Dunson and Groot make it to the Red River. They turn and see that the wagon train has been attacked by Indians and that it is burning. They know it would take too long to go back and help. Dunson and Groot camp with their backs to the river and wait for the night attack. The Indians open with a flaming arrow attack, but Dunson and Groot are too much for them. Dunson kills an Indian in the river, and he is wearing Dunson's mother's bracelet. The Indians manage to kill the 2 cows, leaving the men with only a bull. As Dunson and Groot get ready to leave, a boy, suffering from shock after the wagon train attack, comes in leading a cow. Dunson slaps the boy, who quick draws on him. Dunson punches him and tells him never to trust anyone. The boy says don't ever try to take the gun away from him again. They cross the river into Texas with 1 bull, 1 cow, and 3 male humans. They spend weeks traveling south until they reach the Rio Grande before Dunson decides he likes the land. Dunson says the land all belongs to him. His brand will be 2 lines like a riverbank and a D. It will be the Red River brand. Before his cow is branded, the boy, Matt, says he wants his share. Dunson says he will get it when he's earned it. 2 men come riding up from the south. They represent Don Diego, who rightfully owns the land. Dunson says all the land north of the Rio Grande is his by right of taking. One of the men draws and Dunson kills him. The other does not wish to fight. They bury the dead Mexican and Dunson reads the Bible over him. They finish branding and turn the mighty herd of 2 loose. It takes almost 14 years, but they grow a mighty herd of cattle and horses. The farm has a big house, stable, and working hands. The cemetery has grown over the years as Dunson was challenged. In 1861, the late unpleasantness began, and Matt, Montogomery Clift, spent 4 years away in the Confederate Army. But he is home now. Dunson has no money because there is no cattle market in Texas as the economy is ruined. Matt wants to take the long route to Missouri to sell the cattle because of good water and few Indians. Dunson tells Groot that he can't go along on the trail drive, and the finest example of authentic frontier gibberish was filmed.
Hey, you get back here, you face. Can they say to Wender? Ain't no way that nobody's gonna leave this town. Hell, I was born here, and I was raised here, and dadgummit, I'm gonna die here. And no sidewinding, bushwhacking, hornswoggling, crocker is gonna roll my biscuit cutter.
I'm particularly glad that these lovely children are here today to hear that speech. Not only was it authentic frontier gibberish.
Matt is now wearing Dunson's mother's bracelet. Matt tells Groot that Dunson is afraid. Matt is ready to earn his place. The drive represented in this movie is the Chisholm Trail. After the Civil War, cattle were worth about $4 a head in Texas and about $40 a head in Kansas. The rail line was extended to Abilene, Kansas, and a stockyard was built. A man named Jess Chisholm drove the first large herd from near the Red River to Kansas. Of course, John Wayne played another version of this character in Chisholm, 1970. Several other groups have tried to make a cattle drive north, but none have made it through. Dunson has them round up all the cattle, including their neighbors. Matt goes along, but he doesn't like it. One of the neighbors comes in with his hired gun, Cherry Valance, John Ireland. He and Matt are about the same caliber of gunfighter. Dunson says he will pay $2 per neighbor's cattle after the drive. The neighbor accepts, and Cherry decides to work for Dunson. Matt and Cherry have a macho man gun shooting contest in what has often been considered a homoerotic scene. The movie was referenced in the documentary The Celluloid Closet 1995 that talked about homosexuality in the movie. It revolves around the line where Cherry says, quote, "You know, there are only two things more beautiful than a good gun, a Swiss watch or a woman from anywhere. You ever had a Swiss watch?" Unquote. One of the men, Bunk, has a penchant for stealing sugar from the chuck wagon. Other members of the cattle drive include Buster McGee, Noah Berry Jr., Dan Latimer, Harry Carey Jr., Teeler Yacey, Paul Fix, Old Leather, Hal Talaferio, Quo, Chief Yalachi, and Sims Reeves, Hank Warden. Dunson comes into the bunkhouse and all the men go quiet. Dunson tells him how rough it is without water, with gangs, and with Indians. He says everyone that signs on must finish the job. No excuses are given or taken. At sunup, they head out with a yee-haw. Thanks, City Slickers 1991. Dunson rules the drive with an iron fist. Matt has the route fixed in his mind, and they have to face border gangs to the north. Cherry tells him that he's seen a railhead in Topeka and heard that there is one in Abilene. Dunson jumps in and insists that Missouri is the goal. They slug along the trail for a couple of weeks with no problem other than dust. Dunson says they will have to paint the hoof of a horse with a swollen ankle. Apparently this is like a heat wrap that reduces swelling. Groot snaps a whip at Bunk for taking sugar from the wagon. Dunson is getting meaner and harder to deal with by the time they reach the San Sable River. Dunson even lords over Matt. By day 30, they have reached the Brazos River. Dan is out with the herd and tells Matt and Dunson that the cattle are uneasy. Dan says he wants to buy some red shoes for his wife. Back at the wagon, the men are saying that the coyote howling is making the cattle nervous. Bunk goes to steal sugar and knocks all of the pans out of the wagon. The cattle take off in a stampede. The men ride out to stop the animals, but they run through the camp destroying stuff. Dan is killed by the herd. Another rider goes down, but Matt and Cherry get him out. Finally, the men get the cattle into a canyon where they stop running. Buster stays with the body of Dan so the coyotes won't eat him, but really there's a lot of dead beef around that the coyotes would prefer. After finding Dan among the dead cattle, Dunson is in no mood. Groot is cleaning up the camp and Bunk knows he is responsible. Dunson and Matt will pay Dan's wife for the full drive and get her some red shoes too. In the morning, they bury Dan and Dunson reads the Bible over him. Dunson gets Groot's whip. Bunk draws on Dunson, but Matt shoots him in the shoulder before Dunson can kill him. Groot tells Dunson he was wrong. They send the wounded Bunk home. It seems like Matt and Cherry are heading for a fight. 40 days into the drive, the dust has turned to rain. Dunson is still driving the men and the cattle at an unsustainable pace. Riding with wet cows must smell terrible. The men are all grousing about having beef every night. Teeler wants to turn back because of short rations. Dunson says they keep going. At 60 days, a wounded rider from another drive comes into camp. On the other side of the Red River, they were attacked by a border gang. The gang had dragged him by his neck, but he got away. The man tells him that another fellow named Jess Chisholm has blazed a trail through the Indian nations to Abilene and the railhead. But the man has not seen the railhead, only heard about it. Dunson says Missouri. Naylor, Glenn Strange, says he wants to quit. A few others join in. Everyone in camp is getting their guns. Naylor draws and Groot tosses Dunson a shotgun. Matt and Cherry fire and the 3 quitters are killed. Slim says, "Why read over a man that you have killed? Why try to bring the Lord in on the job?" Matt chews out Dunson. Groot comes over and treats a bullet wound in Dunson's leg. In the morning, Dunson is told that Teeler, Laredo, and Bill Kelsey have run away. They have taken some supplies with them. Dunson sends Cherry and Grant to retrieve the 3 men. Dunson begins pushing the herd and the men harder. They make it to the Red River. Matt wants to cross fresh in the morning, but Dunson pushes ahead. In camp that night, the men are all tired, and Dunson is limping hard from his gun wound. Dunson is not sleeping, and he's getting more deranged. Buster and Groot talk to Matt about Dunson. Matt thinks he will be better when Cherry gets back. In the morning, Cherry and Grant come back with 2 of the 3 quitters. Bill Kelsey has been killed. Dunson says that the men are thieves and he is the law. Healer says he wants to take the herd to Abilene and that Dunson is not the man he signed the pledge with. Dunson says he is going to hang the men instead of shooting them. Matt stands up to him and says they will not be hanged. Dunson gets up to draw on Matt, but Cherry shoots the tongue of the wagon, sending splinters into the gun hand of Dunson. Dunson goes for his gun again, but Buster shoots it away. Teeler grabs a gun and Matt slaps him. He then gives him the gun and dares him to draw on him. Teeler thinks better of it. Matt says Teeler can finish the drive and they are going to Abilene. Matt says they are taking the herd and Dunson is staying here. Dunson tells Groot to go ahead with the herd. Cherry tells Dunson that if he wants to look for him, he will be in Abilene. Dunson calls Matt soft and says he is going to kill him. Dunson watches his life's work walk away. Groot and Matt are nervous that Dunson is going to show up and kill them. Groot figures he won't be back for 18 more days. Matt is not sure about what he's done. They find a cow killed by a Comanche Indian. They decide the Indians would be better than Dunson. They all get rifles out of the chuck wagon. Cherry and Buster are sent 10 miles ahead to scout. Now Matt can't sleep. It's lonely at the top. One day Buster comes in riding hard and says there are women and coffee ahead. They're part of a wagon train of entertainers that are heading from New Orleans to Nevada. Matt takes all the men in the herd to meet the girls. As they get closer, Old Leather hears gunfire. They ride forward and see the mostly female wagon train in a circle being attacked by Comanches. Matt goes in with 4 men to help. He orders the rest of the riders to attack from 2 directions. Leaving the herd alone will allow them to scatter, but Matt thinks it's worth the time. Matt makes it into the wagon ring. On the firing line is Tess Millay, Joanne Drew. She and Matt start verbally sparring, and then she gets hit in the shoulder with an arrow. When the rest of the men ride in, Matt and the men inside the circle run out and fire. Comanche attack is broken. After the fight, Matt removes the arrow from Tess's shoulder. Then he says he has to suck out the poison. What kind of trick is that? Then Tess slaps Matt and passes out. Was that for mansplaining about the gun, or for thinking she was a paid saloon girl? That night, Tess and Cherry are talking, but she only wants to know about Matt. She says she slapped him because he thought she was a saloon girl. Groot comes in and tells the story of Matt and how they came to be together. Matt goes out to relieve Buster on herd guard. He is nervous as a sore-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Tess goes out to talk to Matt because she's already in love with him. Tess talks him into submission. She finally puts the lip lock on Matt. It's raining, so I assume that means they had sex. Matt comes back into camp alone and says because of the rain they are leaving immediately. He and Groot have a short conversation before they decide that Tess can't come along. Somewhere to the south, Dunson is coming fast with 6 new men. They meet up with Tess's wagon train. The herd is 8 or 9 days ahead of Dunson. Tess says she will take care of Dunson. She tells him they are eating his beef, and the man that Dunson vowed to kill told her so. That's when Dunson notices his mother's bracelet. Tess says she stole the bracelet. They verbally spar, and Dunson says that Matt left her. Matt leaving her behind brings back the time Dunson left Finn behind. Dunson wanted to leave a legacy to Matt. Finally, he asked Tess to bear a child for him. She agrees as long as he won't kill Matt. She's had a gun in her sling the entire time, but Dunson saw it, and he had his gun ready too. They both put their guns on the table and talk about love. She asks to go along with Dunson, and he agrees. The herd pushes forward, and Matt worries that there's no railhead at the end. Finally, they hear a train whistle. The train stops to let the herd cross. They are 12 miles from Abilene. Mr. Melville, Harry Carey, rides out and tells Matt they are really happy to see the first herd. They drive them down the main street to the stockyard. Mr. Melville, Matt, and Buster go to make a deal. Matt is shocked to be under a roof. Matt doesn't know what price, and Mr. Melville offers him $20 per head. He then tells him to find the top price for a lot of 500 cows, and he will buy the entire herd at that rate. Mr. Melville says the money to pay off the men will be ready that night. Dunson, Tess, and the gang cross the railroad about 4 or 5 hours behind the herd. Matt signs the contract and gets a check made out to Dunson. Mr. Melville thinks the check and the successful job should change Dunson's mind. He offers to help, but Matt turns him down. Cherry and Buster shadow Matt for his protection. The rest of the crew is not far behind. Matt goes to his hotel room, and Tess is waiting there. He pulls his gun before he knows who she is. She says Dunson is coming in at sunup. Tess is wearing all black for some reason. They get all kissy-faced. In the morning, Matt comes out with Tess and Groot behind. The entire crew is nearby. Dunson and company come into town. His gang is only for backup if Matt's guys get involved. The two groups move towards each other. Dunson dismounts and does the John Wayne walk towards Matt. Cherry knows Matt won't shoot. He calls Dunson out, and the old man draws first. Both are hit, and Cherry is down in the street, but the wounded Dunson goes on. Dunson and Matt face off, and Dunson demands that Matt draw. He starts shooting around Matt as he walks closer and grazes his cheek with a shot. Matt stands firm. Dunson calls him soft, pulls his gun away, slaps Matt once, and then starts slapping him again. Finally, Matt starts hitting the old man. They're doing a pretty good job on each other. Finally, Tess shoots a gun in the air and starts fussing at them. After she chews them out, Dunson says Matt should marry that girl. Matt asks when is Dunson going to stop telling other people what to do. Dunson says they will add an M to the brand when they get back because Matt earned it. Notes. Wow. Who the hell wrote this ending? The first time I saw this movie, I thought the film broke and I missed something. Did they just run out of film and decide to rap? Going back to the Ebert quote that, quote, two men act out a fiercely psychological rivalry for 2 hours only to cave in instantly to a female's glib tongue-lashing, unquote. I will add that poor old Cherry is gut shot so the two can get along. Tom Dunson is changing through the movie from the Ringo Kid to Captain Ahab. One thing that Ebert caught that I missed, I didn't notice that he was wearing a white hat at the beginning and a black hat at the end. World famous short summary, you can have a cow for a friend and you can have whiskey for a friend. But if you leave the women behind, you'll wind up drunk and kissing a cow. Hope you enjoyed today's show. I really appreciate you spending the time listening. You can find connections to social media and email on my site at classicmovierev.com. There are links in the podcast show notes as well. Remember, this show is completely free and independent. All that I ask is that you jump over to Apple Podcasts and give me a review. It really helps the show get found. Beware the Moors.